He walked into the cozy little cafe for his blind date, a confident smile plastered on his face, certain that charm alone could carry him through the evening, but the moment he sat down and looked across the table at her, he noticed something different, something in her eyes that immediately made him feel uneasy yet curious. She had a warmth about her that was impossible to ignore, and as the conversation started, he couldn't help but ask her about her past, a question that seemed harmless at first, until she mentioned her late husband in a soft, almost apologetic tone, and that was when his expression changed, a flicker of judgment passing through his eyes, and he leaned back, crossing his arms and saying bluntly, "I don't date widows," as if that statement would somehow protect him from the complexities of life or the inevitability of human pain, and she paused, looking at him with a calm, almost sad smile. And in that silence, the world seemed to shift around him, because he realized that her experiences, her loss, her resilience, were not something to be feared or judged, but something that made her stronger, more compassionate, and infinitely more real than the shallow assumptions he carried like armor. She could see the hesitation in his eyes, the shame beginning to creep in as he recognized the cruelty in his words, and she gently spoke, telling him about the life she had lived, the love she had lost, the lessons she had learned, and the depth of character that had been forged in the fires of grief. And as he listened, the walls he had built around himself began to crumble, because here was someone who had faced the unimaginable and still smiled, still reached out, still believed in human connection, and in that moment, he felt an uncomfortable, humbling lesson settling in his chest like a stone. Life is unpredictable, fragile, and often unfair, and to dismiss someone because of their past is not only cruel, it is ignorant, and he realized how small his world had been, how narrow his vision, and how much courage it takes to survive the storms that life throws at people, to keep showing up, to keep loving, to keep being vulnerable in a world that often punishes vulnerability. The rest of the evening passed in a blur as he listened to her stories, each one peeling away his arrogance, exposing his insecurities, and revealing the truth he had long ignored. That life's greatest teachers are often not in classrooms or books, but in the people who have endured what you cannot imagine, who have fought battles you have never seen, and who carry scars that tell stories of survival, of hope, and of the quiet, relentless beauty of the human spirit. And by the time they left the cafe, he was a different man, humbled and enlightened, walking beside her with a newfound respect, knowing that he had been given a rare gift, a glimpse into a life that had faced darkness and still shone, and he silently vowed to himself that he would never again judge someone for the paths they had walked, for the losses they had endured, or the love they had once held, because in that brief encounter, life had taught him a lesson far greater than any he had ever learned from pride or privilege, a lesson that would echo in his heart forever, that love is not about perfection or convenience, but about empathy, courage, and the willingness to see the person in front of you for all that they are, fully, completely, without fear, without prejudice, and with an open heart ready to be changed. He couldn't stop thinking about her long after the blind date ended, the words he had said replaying in his mind over and over, the harshness of, "I don't date widows," echoing like a cold slap to his own ego, and he found himself walking aimlessly through the city streets that night, the neon lights reflecting off wet pavement, feeling a strange mix of shame and curiosity gnawing at him, because he had never met anyone like her, someone whose presence commanded attention not through arrogance or beauty alone, but through a quiet, unshakable strength that came from surviving unimaginable pain. And he remembered the way she had smiled at him when he spoke those cruel words, a smile that didn't retreat but instead seemed to challenge him, to invite him to look deeper into himself. And as he walked past cafes, bookstores, and shuttered shops, he realized that the lesson she had unknowingly taught him was far more profound than he had first understood. It wasn't just about not judging someone for their past, it was about humility, about learning to see the depth of human experience without fear or prejudice, and he wondered why it had taken meeting her for him to feel this, why life had to give him such a direct, unignorable mirror of his own flaws in the form of another human being, and he felt a pang of regret, wishing he could rewind time, wishing he could take back the casual cruelty of his words. Wishing he could have been the kind of man worthy of sitting across from her without judgment, and yet, even in his guilt, he Felt a strange spark of hope, a realization that people could change, that moments could teach lessons if one was willing to listen, and so he resolved that he would reach out to her, that he would apologize not just with words but with actions, with genuine effort to understand her life, her pain, and the remarkable courage that had carried her through it. And the next morning, he found himself outside the small cafe again, waiting, rehearsing in his mind how he could speak without ego, how he could admit his mistakes without shame paralyzing him. And when she walked in, the sunlight catching her hair in a halo of gold, he felt a wave of admiration so strong it almost silenced him, because she had already begun to teach him that life's beauty was often intertwined with its suffering, and that those who had survived storms were often the ones most capable of love, empathy, and profound understanding. And when she noticed him, there was a flicker of recognition, a pause in her step. And he saw that she remembered him, the man who had once been so arrogant, and in that moment, he realized that redemption wasn't about grand gestures or public apologies, but about honesty, about showing up, about acknowledging one's flaws openly and vulnerably. And so he approached her, his voice shaking slightly, saying, "I owe you an apology. I was thoughtless, cruel even, and I see now how wrong I was." And she looked at him, eyes searching his, and in that silent exchange, he felt the weight of his past ignorance lifting slightly, because she didn't recoil or ridicule, she simply listened, and then she nodded, a gesture that was both forgiveness and an invitation to begin again, not from where they had left off, but from a place deeper, more authentic, where masks and pretenses had no place. And as they sat, she told him more about her life, stories of love, loss, resilience, and hope that poured out like rivers, sweeping him along in currents of emotion he hadn't known existed within him. And he listened, absorbing every detail, every nuance, realizing that he had never truly listened to anyone before, that he had never allowed himself to be fully present, fully vulnerable. And he felt a shift inside him, a subtle but irrevocable transformation, as he began to see the world through her lens, understanding that people's pasts were not burdens to be feared but landscapes to be explored, maps of courage and survival. And he felt humbled, awed, and slightly terrified at the depth of his own ignorance. And then she laughed, a soft, melodic sound that seemed to carry the weight of sorrow and the lightness of joy simultaneously. And he realized that laughter was not mere amusement, it was resilience, it was defiance against pain. It was the human spirit refusing to be broken, and he wanted to learn to laugh that way too, to live that way too, to carry both sorrow and joy without shame or fear. And as the hours passed, they wandered through the city together, talking about everything from trivial matters to profound truths, sharing meals, stories, and quiet silences that were more meaningful than words. And with every step, he felt the walls around his heart dissolving, the arrogance, the judgment, the shallow assumptions about life and love giving way to empathy, understanding, and a deep, abiding respect for the woman beside him. And he realized that he had been living in a self-imposed cage, one constructed from pride and fear, and that meeting her had given him a key, a chance to unlock the door and step into a world where love was not about control, convenience, or ego, but about connection, vulnerability, and the courage to see people fully, with all their scars, all their triumphs, all their humanity. And he thought about the irony, that the very thing he had feared, the experience of loss and widowhood, was what made her so extraordinary. And he felt a surge of gratitude, not just toward her, but toward life itself, for teaching him a lesson so harsh, so unforgettable, that he could never unlearn it. And then came the moment that truly changed him. They stumbled upon a small park, the late afternoon sun casting golden light through the trees, and she paused to sit on a bench, looking at the horizon with a faraway expression. And he asked her what she was thinking, and she turned to him and said simply, "I've lived through things most people can't even imagine, and yet here I am, still believing in love, in kindness, in the possibility of being seen for who I am." And he felt tears prick his eyes. Because it was not just a confession, it was a challenge, a mirror held up to him demanding that he confront his own limitations, his shallow fears, his small-minded judgments. And he realized that true courage was not in avoiding pain but in facing it, in embracing it, in letting it shape you rather than harden you. And in that moment, he wanted to be brave. He wanted to rise to the level of human empathy and understanding that she embodied naturally, effortlessly, because it was forged in fire, and he knew he could never go back to the man who had casually dismissed her life with a flippant sentence, because he had been irrevocably changed, touched by someone whose spirit was indomitable, whose heart had endured storms and emerged radiant. And as they continued walking, he noticed the subtle ways she navigated the world, the kindness she showed to strangers, the patience in her gestures, the quiet strength in her voice. And he understood that life had given him not just a lesson, but a living example of the virtues he had always admired from afar but never truly comprehended, and he felt a swelling desire to become worthy of her friendship, her trust, her love, not through words, but through deeds, through sincere attention, through an openness he had never known before. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, he realized that the day had been a journey not just through the city streets but through the corridors of his own soul, and he marveled at the irony that a blind date, which had begun with judgment and pride, had transformed into a profound encounter with wisdom, compassion, and the raw, unfiltered truth of what it means to be human. And he silently vowed that he would carry this lesson forward, that he would never again dismiss someone because of their past, their pain, or their experience, that he would approach life with humility, openness, and the willingness to learn from anyone, anywhere, at any time. And as they finally parted that evening, he felt a strange mix of awe and gratitude, knowing that he had been given a gift most people never receive, a glimpse into the heart of a woman who had endured loss, embraced life, and taught him, without intent, the deepest lesson of all, that love, understanding, and human connection are not about convenience, perfection, or superficial judgments, but about seeing, truly seeing, another soul, and allowing it to illuminate your own in ways you never imagined. And as he walked home under the star-studded sky, the lesson settled in his chest like a warm ember, glowing steadily, reminding him that life has a way of teaching the lessons we need most in the most unexpected ways, often through the people we initially misunderstand, and that sometimes, the ones we are quickest to judge are the ones who hold the keys to our own transformation. And he carried that understanding forward, feeling lighter, wiser, and infinitely more aware of the beauty, pain, resilience, and infinite complexity that defines the human experience. And he knew, with a clarity he had never known before, that from this moment onward, he would live differently, love differently, and see differently, for life had delivered him a teacher he could never forget, a woman whose heart had been tested by loss, yet whose spirit remained luminous, and who had shown him, without judgment or arrogance, that the greatest lesson one can learn is to approach every soul with humility, empathy, and the courage to be changed.